Hello, everybody. This is Rick Will, and today I want to talk about X-Men 97. A revival of the iconic 1992 X-Men the Animated Series, X-Men 97 burst on the scene and quickly made a name for itself as inarguably the biggest cartoon to come out in 2024. Now, growing up, I never watched the original animated series, but I went back and watched a few episodes since 97 came out to catch up on some things. My exposure to X-Men was largely X-Men Evolution, Wolverine in the X-Men, and the Fox movies. Wolverine in the X-Men in particular standing out as one of my favorite cartoons of all time. X-Men Days of Future Past standing out as one of my favorite movies of all time. It's not a perfect starting point, but if you know a decent amount of X-Men lore, you can follow along with 97 just fine. For the most part, I really enjoyed X-Men 97. The mutant intolerance and bigotry, the other major characters taking the spotlight and not making it the Wolverine show, the incredible dialogue and voice acting. There's a lot to like about the series, but there are also things that hold it back from being a great series to me. Problems I have that even make me hesitant to start the second season, which just started airing a week ago. This isn't much of a formal review, it's just what I think about X-Men 97. The series follows the X-Men, a group of mutants trained and led by telepath Professor Charles Xavier. Professor X's power as a telepath and empath make him more understanding of the plight of others, especially his fellow mutant brethren. He's dedicated his life to easing tension between humans and mutants and working to make mutants more accepted in society. Usually opposing them is Professor X's longtime rival and best friend Eric Magnus, better known by the name Magneto. Magneto is a Holocaust survivor who vowed to never let the injustice and atrocities he and his people faced in the Holocaust happen to his mutant family too, even if it means taking more extremist measures than Charles. The two friends' difference in philosophy causes them to separate and be at odds with each other, both recruiting their own band of mutants and using their own methods while both trying to make life better for mutant kind. X-Men 97 begins 1 year after the supposed death of Charles Xavier after an assassination attempt by Henry Gyrick. In reality, Professor X was taken to a far-off planet for treatment with alien technology far more advanced than on Earth. Since Xavier's absence, Cyclops has taken up the mantle as leader, but he and Jean Grey also desire for a life outside of the X-Men. Magneto appears in Xavier's study and informs them that per Charles's will, Magneto now owns everything of the X-Men, including leading the team. The series from there follows Magneto's attempt to lead the X-Men and honor Charles's faith in him while being tested in his devotion at every turn. This made for a very compelling story. The X-Men always felt different from other superhero shows to me. They have recurring villains and save the world sometimes, but the stories with the X-Men always felt more personal, and for a more personal cause than just fight the bad guy to save the world or save the civilian in distress. The X-Men is about gaining acceptance, self-identity, finding a home where people like you and have been through what you've been through can come together and be a family. They always felt more human to me than most other superhero media, and for the most part, the series knocked that aspect of the X-Men out of the park. Getting to see relationships not explored much in other adaptations like Wolverine and Morph, Storm and Jean, even Cyclops and Cable. Seriously, I didn't even know who Cable was until Deadpool 2 and didn't know Cable was Cyclops' son until 97 came out. The dialogue's top-notch even though it can lean into campy and cheesy sometimes, though it's usually self-aware when it's done that way. I think all in all the series was very good the first 8 episodes. There are some things I didn't care for, like Magneto and Rogue's relationship or Storm losing her powers and leaving the X-Men for a few episodes. Stuff like that, but those are more nitpicks than something I would say I really had a problem with and hold the show back for me. No, my problem lies elsewhere. Starting with the Jean, Scott, and Wolverine debacle. For context, at the end of episode 2, another Jean Grey shows up on Xavier's doorsteps. It turns out, for an unknown amount of time, Jean was kidnapped by evil scientist Mr. Sinister and experimented on and released a clone of Jean back to the X-Men. This clone of Jean got married and had a child with Cyclops. By the end of episode 3, the conflict is resolved and the clone Jean, now going by the alias Madeline, goes to the island of Genosha, where mutants have a society where they live in peace. In episode 5, the real Jean feels distant from Scott after returning home. Wolverine notices the wedge forming between the two and tries to encourage Jean to make good with Scott. Jean remembers how she was lost to the Phoenix Force, but Scott's eyes helped her keep her sanity. They anchored her, as she said. Wolverine remarks that he's only ever seen the one Jean Grey. Jean kisses Wolverine and he immediately backs off, as he's accepted that Scott and Jean are made for each other and he's completely willing to sit in the cuck chair forever. Jean soon finds out later that Scott has been cheating on her telepathically with Madeline all the way in Genosha. Now you cannot convince me that these two scenes were not mixed up somewhere in production. It makes no sense for Jean to give that whole speech about her love for Scott to then immediately cheat on him with Wolverine. Scott's actions, while not good, are more understandable, and he hasn't even been with the real Jean after the whole Madeline incident. Having the kiss take place after that fight makes more sense and makes the line Wolverine drops about having only seen one Jean Grey hit harder and makes her actions more understandable. As it stands now, she unapologetically kisses Wolverine and neither her or Wolverine have told Scott. Hopefully that changes in season 2 because that can't stay kept under the wraps forever. Jean Grey as a character doesn't get much time to shine in TV shows and movie adaptations as it is. Most of them just rush to do the Phoenix Force stuff and forget that the reason the Phoenix Force hit so hard was because it was an established character who spent years on the X-Men meeting a tragic end. As tragic as comic books can be because no one can stay dead for long, doing a disservice to her character for this cheap drama wasn't worth it. Next, we have Rogue. Rogue and Magneto were retconned into having a previous relationship in this continuity of the X-Men, following a comic book storyline. This is one of those moments where just because something was in the comics doesn't mean it needed to be adapted, and just because something was in the comics doesn't mean it was good or well written. Once Magneto joins the X-Men, they rekindled their relationship, leaving poor old Gambit out to dry. I'm not going to pretend I'm the biggest Gambit fan or I know a lot about him. Most of my exposure to X-Men was him as a morally gray con man who has sometimes helped the X-Men and sometimes put them in danger. But even I felt really bad for the guy. You can tell in this series at least Gambit is genuinely a good guy and his love for Rogue is real, not even needing to be intimate to want to be with her. Apparently Magneto's electromagnetism has a way of making it so he and her can touch, and that was the deal breaker for Rogue. Again, I don't really have enough of a problem with it to hold it as a negative. Rogue's a grown woman and can choose who she wants to be with, even though it's very uncomfortable to watch at times. Unfortunately, things take a turn and Genosha is attacked by Sentinels, and Gambit dies while defeating them and Magneto is presumably killed in action as well. This sends Rogue into a downward spiral where she rampages across the country looking for clues on who orchestrated the attack, her character being driven by avenging Gambit, the one she spurned and ignored until it was too late to appreciate him. It is revealed later on that Magneto survived the attack and is planning to let the world end while he sits in his base on Asteroid M while he waits for it to happen. More on this later. I have a whole rant about Magneto coming up. But this is where Rogue truly loses me as a viewer. She chooses to join Magneto, claiming she will not watch any more innocent mutants die, while Magneto's plan will quite literally kill more mutants than the ones that died in Genosha, as well as innocent humans. Gambit did not die for this. Not only did Gambit not sacrifice himself for this, but it actively spits on his grave. So for Rogue to act like she's honoring Gambit and basically making her whole character revolve around him, I'm sorry, but you lost me. Not only that, but she treats the X-Men coming to stop Magneto as a game and can't even commit to her heel turn, and that makes it far worse for me. And for all to be forgiven when she quite literally turns her back on the X-Men and the planet, and everyone just smiles and nods and act like nothing happened, yeah, episode 9 in particular is where this show went off the rails for me. And finally, we have Magneto, Eric Magnus Lyncher. Where do I even start with this one? Magneto for the first 8 episodes was awesome. Besides the whole Rogue thing, but we're not worried about that right now. He was a great complex character trying to follow the path Xavier left for him. Every action he made and everything he said made sense, and you could understand how he came to the conclusions he did and did the things he did. Even in episode 8, where he gave up his role as leader of the X-Men and EMP'd the planet to stop Bastion Sentinels and human hybrids from killing mutants, despite his actions killing numerous innocents in the process. Episode 9 is where they ruined this Magneto for me. Magneto decides he's had enough of this world and innocent mutants being wiped out, so he decides to leave the world without electricity and polarity and whatever else happened after he EMP'd the planet, which will soon cause the end of the world. Magneto plans to let this happen and watch from Asteroid M to put an end to this conflict once and for all, willingly killing most mutants on the planet as well if he succeeds. This is not the Magneto I love. I hate Crash Out and Destroy the World Magneto. I hated it in X-Men Apocalypse and I hate it here. Every time Magneto opens his mouth this episode, he pisses me off. Ironic since he tells Charles to shut up when he tries to convince him to fix the planet.
Gods abandon those who believe in them.
Quite literally what you are doing.
I promised a boy a future free of fear.
You are gonna kill more mutants than humans ever have. I'm sure all those mutants roaming around in the dark down there waiting to die are very grateful.
Evolution thrives in darkness.
You don't care about other mutants. If your defense is that the strongest mutants that can survive the world ending are the deserving ones, and everyone else was a necessary sacrifice, you are legitimately worse than Bastion and the humans. At least with Bastion winning, humans have more of a future and the world doesn't end. Like I said earlier with Rogue, when there's so much bad writing hitting you back to back and everyone just pretends everything's okay, it makes the writing that much worse for me. This show had a real bad problem with glorifying Magneto, bending over backwards to try to paint him as in the right, while also trying to vilify Charles. Charles didn't ask to be almost killed by Henry Gyrick, didn't ask to be taken to some far-off planet and to be healed and leave everyone by themselves. Well, he's also trying his hardest to go back, but basically being held hostage by his alien girlfriend, mind you. He gave the X-Men and his property to Magneto, but that wasn't a problem while Magneto was in charge of the X-Men. Was it the best move? Probably not, but it's a very Charles Xavier move to make. People acting like all this mayhem is somehow Charles' fault makes no sense instead of blaming the people actually at fault, Bastion and Magneto. These last 2 episodes did irreparable damage to this show for me. I can still enjoy the first 8 episodes just fine, but I have little to no interest in jumping into the new season. Trying to sweep this all under the rug and move on to the new plot in season 2 isn't going to work for me. From what I've seen of the OG series, it also had erratic pacing, which seems to be par for the course for those late 80s, early 90s cartoons. But there was some wonky pacing earlier in the season too, but it didn't have the bad writing to make it a problem. As time goes on, the more I feel I don't want any more revivals. I was already not a big fan of them in the first place, but their hit rate has been so low, or they start off good just to lose steam and forget what made the show good in the first place, that it almost doesn't even seem worth it anymore. I pray that X-Men 97 bounces back from this and redeems itself so I can look back at this and it's just a misstep in an otherwise great show. As a wise man once said, just because someone stumbles and falls doesn't mean they're lost forever. Maybe I just need to hope again and believe in the X-Men. With all that being said, I'm Rick Will, and I thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.